Good afternoon. Welcome to the Center on Technology and Disabilities webinar. I'm Tracy Gray, and I'm the project director from the American Institutes for Research, working in partnership with our lead at FHI 360. I'm delighted to be joined today by my colleagues Kristen Rudell and Elise Brand from AIR, and we're pleased to have Jeremy McDonald with us today, who is the Director of Technology and Innovation at the Redmond School District. Today we're going to be talking about stories from the field, technology implementation at the school and district level. We think that this is a topic of great interest to those of you who are in the field, teachers, school administrators, and other staff who are dealing with the challenges of effectively leveraging technology to enhance teaching and learning. We'll be taking questions as we go along, so please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll answer your questions as soon as we can and hope that this will be a very lively discussion. So on that note, Kristen, Elise, and Jeremy, take it away.
Great, thanks Tracy. This is Elise Brand, and I'm going to get us started. Kristen and I will be leading out over the course of the next several weeks an online course through the CTD Learning Center on technology implementation strategies that work. And we wanted to do this kickoff webinar as a way to get people excited about the course, hear some really inspiring stories from the field, and then have the opportunity to go into the course and make use of the activities and worksheets and videos we have there to help you actually work through the process of doing successful technology implementation. But we wanted to start our kickoff with some fun and exciting and interesting stories and talk a little bit amongst ourselves and start a discussion about technology implementation and some of the strategies that work well, how to overcome challenges and obstacles, and particularly thinking about how to implement technology in a way that supports all students, especially those who struggle or students with disabilities. So first, we wanted to set out that, we amongst ourselves, as a team, Kristen and I kind of refer to both technology integration and technology implementation. And usually when we're talking about integration, we're talking about what's happening at the classroom level with the teacher. And when we're talking about implementation, we're really talking about that big systemic process that districts and schools use to enhance and support teachers in using technology and supporting best practices to meet the needs of all learners. And so first we just put up a little example of what successful technology integration at the classroom level looks like. And you can read this little story about Mrs. Brett, who's a 5th grade class teacher, and they're working with their students learning about the Civil War. And she's using a variety of technology tools, with her students. Some of her students are able to use ebooks or highlighting tools to be able to tag information. Other students may be using tablets or linking to images and primary source documents. And some are using headphones to be able to hear text read aloud. And so Ms. Brett is really using a variety of technology tools to address the different learning needs that are going on in her classroom. And students are all actively engaged with using these different tools. And so in order for that level of successful and seamless technology integration to happen in the classroom, it needs to be supported at the school and the district level by successful technology implementation. And so, some of the questions we might ask are, how did this teacher's principal help support her efforts to personalize her reading instruction using these tools? How did she plan her instruction to meet the needs of all students, including struggling learners and students with disabilities? Who did she work with? What kind of team support did she have? What sort of technology support was available to her? The worst feeling as a classroom teacher is when you go to use a technology tool and it doesn't work for whatever reason and you don't have somebody that you can call or get access to some kind of support in a timely manner. And what happened at the school and district levels ultimately to set Ms. Brett and the other teachers in her school up for success and to be able to use these tools in a way that are successful and meeting the needs of the students in their class. So the genesis of this course that Kristen and I have developed comes out of our work, and Kristen's going to talk a little bit about that on another project that is just wrapping up called Power Up What Works. And that was focused on supporting teachers, supporting schools and districts to use evidence-based practices and technology tools to support students with disabilities. And we learned a lot through talking to schools, working with districts, pilot testing, going out and doing PD workshops with teachers about what works and about what can help really support this process. And so Kristen will talk a little bit about some of the things we learned and how that has factored into the development of this course.
Thanks, Elise.
Sure.
So as Elise noted, the Power Up What Works project, it was part of the Center on Technology Implementation, and this is an online learning platform for teachers to be able to really think strategically about how to integrate technology solutions with evidence-based practices in reading and mathematics. And it's also about expanding beyond the classroom level and into how do we set up the processes at the school level and at the district level so that teachers are receiving the support that they need to be effective at the classroom level to ultimately impact student outcomes. And it was a 5-year project that was funded out of the Office of Special Education Programs and the Department of Education. And a challenge that we had was, how do we unpack this black box of technology implementation, integration, implementation strategies, and really think through, the processes that are needed so that, we have everything from connectivity and technical support to professional development about making use of technology solutions that weave and integrate with evidence-based practices, and that we're really able to support at a school or district level, and how teachers can transform the learning environment and enhance what's happening for students with a focus on students with disabilities. And so, if you could advance to the next slide, we developed several tools and recommendations that were targeted for schools and districts, and primarily it was a practice guide that resulted, and we were able to not only cull best practices from the literature and the work that we know organizations are doing throughout the country, but we were also able to work very closely with some schools and districts across the nation that were grappling with these questions of how to be able to integrate technology in a useful way across their building. And these districts ranged from suburban districts to small rural districts, a charter school, and some urban areas as well. And so we had a really good feel for the different challenges and barriers and ways that the teams were working to overcome those barriers. And we applied this thinking with the recommendations that were coming out of the literature to create a best practice recommendations guide. And that's what really is now driving the learning that will happen in the course that Elise mentioned that launches tomorrow. So these recommendations range from the importance of working as a team, that it is not the responsibility of just the technology coordinator to make this all happen, but rather it is the coordination between the technology coordinator, curriculum and instruction personnel, the principal, the teachers, all collaborating together to create a systemic change that provides support to all of those that are invested in the project. And it's a process of enhancing the school vision and creating some action goals that focus on implementing technology that isn't an add-on, but rather is something that supplements the work that we're doing across other strategies, other initiatives, and really drills down into making use of the data so that students with disabilities and their peers are able to achieve enhanced outcomes. Of course, there is the piece of defining the technology budget and how that budget can not only fund startup costs or new technologies that are coming into the building, but the maintenance and ongoing costs that become a line item within the budget in many districts. And recommendation 5 relates to the planning of professional learning opportunities. It can't be overstated how important this component is when you're looking at successful implementation across classrooms. Although it's true that in some school buildings you might be able to drop off devices at the door and 1 or 2 teachers will pick it up and figure it out on their own. But if you're looking to actually create school-wide change and district-wide change that really looks different, then teachers need support not only about how to use the devices, but how to use those devices in a meaningful way that enrich and expand the curriculum. And it's one thing to know how to use a tablet at home for your own personal reasons, but it's a whole different process to be able to figure out how do we use this to really enrich the learning experience and facilitate something new for the students that promotes creativity and creation of new ideas. And the last recommendation drills down into creating that systemic support that ranges from, what do I do if my devices don't turn on or I can't get connectivity on Monday, to how do I access additional learning opportunities and professional support to ensure that I can access the data that is collected through the data dashboards on some of the programs, or ways to be able to look at the progress monitoring devices and software so that I really know that I'm making a difference and that these strategies are working. So it's the combination of all of these recommendations that work together to support the school-wide change and district-level change that we're aiming to promote. Jeremy's with us today to be able to talk about his work, and he's done some amazing things through his work at the Redmond School District, and we just want to be able to hear his stories and have this opportunity to be able to ask questions and move forward. Jeremy?
Jeremy, I think you're on mute. You just have to press
There.
*6. There we go. Great.
I muted myself. Sorry about that. No, I was just saying that I appreciate the opportunity that I have to share today. Stories that I want to share today about implementation in the schools and district-wide fortunately come from some folks that have taken the initiative to do it themselves. But as part of that, I want to talk about some of the things that I've learned from in my new position and in my previous positions. So just a little bit of background about myself. I taught for 8.5 years in an elementary setting. I taught 3rd grade all the way up to 6th grade. I also was a ELL teacher and a RTI specialist in my building. So I had various roles within the building and was able to work with technology in one-to-one cases for about the last 4 years I was in the classroom, and was an instructional coach supporting a district and their district-wide rollout last year, and now I'm helping lead Redmond School District with regards to technology and innovation and learning now in my current role. But for me, a lot of this really has to start with why we need to be connected, why we need these tools. So there's one of the books I recently read this past year is called The Book of Learning and Forgetting by Frank Smith. And there's a couple lines from it that I really like that hit on our innate need to be connected. And he says we learn from people around us with whom we identify. We can't help learning from them, and we learn without knowing that we are learning. This identification creates the possibility of learning. All learning pivots on who we think we are and who we see ourselves as capable of becoming. And I really appreciated that. It resonated with me because when students enter our schools, they have a perception of who they are and who they want to become. And it's really up to us to nurture that and support that and not do the opposite. And so technology provides us with a lot of opportunities to get those kids to connect with more people, to expand their learning, to expand their potential, and expand the opportunities they have to really grow as a human being, but also as a learner. So the first story that I want to share with you today takes place in 2 states. So it takes place first in the state of Tennessee, and so we're going to call this one Kelly's story. Kelly's name's actually been changed, and you'll see why here in just a bit. But we're going to call it Kelly's story, and it's about 2 classrooms. Mrs. Graham, she's a kindergarten teacher in Minnesota, and Mr. Turner, who's a social studies teacher in Tennessee. And since the beginning of this school year, 2014-2015, Mr. Turner's students have been reading to Mrs. Graham's kindergartners every Thursday. And it's become quite an event for a lot of Mr. Turner's students. Initially, a lot of these students were a little hesitant, a little shy to read, but it's got to the point this year where now there's a waiting list on who actually gets to read to these kids. And oftentimes there are kids that will be in there, as you can see in the picture on the slide. There's a couple of students there reading that work together to read to these kids, and it's a great opportunity for them. But one thing about Mr. Turner's school and his students is that it's not a traditional setting. Mr. Turner works at Robertson County Alternative Program, and these kids come to what they call RCAP because of behavioral or emotional disorders or issues they might be having that's causing them to causing issues within their regular ed setting, and they need to be removed from it for one reason or another. And they come to RCAP, and the minimum stay there at RCAP is at least 68 days, and they have to complete certain requirements in order to return to their regular ed setting. Now, despite the minimum being 68 days, the average is actually 12 to 18 months that students spend there, so it's not a very short stint that kids spend at RCAP. The average class size is about 7 to 10, but because of the student population and the issues that they deal with there, it's pretty common that most kids aren't there, and so it causes some issues with consistency in learning, and as any teacher would know that, habitually absent students have a difficult time learning the content and learning the skills that they need. But just random one day, Mr. Turner saw a message sent out by Mrs. Graham asking for some folks to read to her kids, and he went ahead and answered that and began having his students at RCAP read to these kindergartners. The average reading level, another thing that's important to take into account here for the students that attend RCAP, is between 1st and 3rd grade. So we have students that are actually ranging from about 8 years old all the way up to 18 years old. And these students are reading at a very low level. And so initially, as I mentioned, a lot of students were hesitant to read to Mrs. Graham's classroom. But as they began to do it, there began to be some changes, especially in Kelly. So Kelly came to RCAP because of some anger issues. She had some emotional problems that she was dealing with, and she needed to be removed from her current regular ed situation. And she came to RCAP very angry, very upset with a lot of things that were happening to her in her world. And she, for whatever reason, began to take to this opportunity of reading to these kids. And just as Frank Smith mentioned, you know, we learn from people and don't even know it. She began to learn from these kindergartners. She began to learn how to smile again. She learned how to enjoy herself and find happiness in a lot of stuff she did. Every day, every Thursday, she'd have this opportunity to see these smiling faces and oftentimes hear the cheers and applause from the kindergartners when they'd see her return to the screen. And this was huge for Kelly. And actually, when I spoke with Mr. Turner about the whole story, he said that despite all the strict rules and restrictions and everything that happens at RCAP, there seemed to be a new palpable joy that existed within the building. And a lot of that had to do with this ability to connect with these kids. And a lot of that joy was started by Kelly, and she began to actually change not only in herself but within the school. A lot of changes began to happen, and Kelly actually was one of those success stories where she actually was able to leave within this minimum 68 days, and she became the impetus of a lot of new programs at RCAP now that focus on student potential and not just their ability to, you know, check the boxes off and get through the program each day. But what's amazing is that these little kids all the way up in Minnesota had an opportunity to connect with these students. And one thing, if you think about it, if you put your kind of wrap your head around being a 5-year-old, I have a 5-year-old at home, and I want you to think about here for a second, what is it that a 5-year-old wants most from anyone, whether it's an adult, a peer, another child, whatever it might be. What is it that they want most? And this idea dawned on me one day. I was leaving for work, and this is the same routine. I went through it this morning when I left. My 5-year-old, who's now 6, comes running down the stairs, and he asks me, "Dad, will you do X, Y, or Z with me? Will you play? Will you wrestle? Can we go outside and ride bikes?" Whatever it is, he wants me to do something with him. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. We don't always have the time to do that thing. But I realized, though, that that's me telling him yes was more than enough. And it dawned on me that what my son and these little kids want, all they want is time. They want meaningful time with someone else. They want someone to be able to take the time to do something that they enjoy and do it with them. And so when you think about it, these little 5-year-olds were being read these books that they love and adored from people that were giving them time. And it was a huge change in Mrs. Graham's classroom as well. And this picture here is actually Mrs. Corey Graham from Minnesota. And she did this whole video explaining how grateful she was to Mr. Turner's classroom. And it really not only changed these high school students that were struggling behaviorally and emotionally, but it really changed Mrs. Turner or Mrs. Graham and her outlook, because there's a lot of stigma that's attached to students that are in these alternative programs, and it was an opportunity for Mrs. Graham to help these students actually see beyond some of these stigmas. And the great thing about this, though, is that the technology behind this wasn't anything revolutionary. It didn't take months and months of planning and preparation. It was simply a Google Hangout that was used between the two classrooms and essentially coordinating calendars so that they could do this every week. But the impact that it's going to have on Kelly and her peers and these kindergartners is going to be lasting. And that ability to connect as a human, but also share in these experiences was pretty fantastic. Another story that I wanted to share with you has to do with unintended consequences. in my last school district last year that I worked in, I worked with, we were rolling out one-to-one devices in 9 of our 27 schools, and the devices we had chose were iPads, and we were working with a lot of these students on how to use them, not just to do worksheets and the typical substitution stuff, but actually engage them in some more meaningful learning. And I wasn't there this year, and the example I'm telling you now is something that was relayed to me from one of my colleagues back in Ben Lapine Schools. There's a student that stumbled on one of the apps that was on his device, and he began to do what is called sketchnoting. He had seen a video on YouTube about it, and he thought that maybe he'd give it a try to see if it'd help him in his classroom. And so without any instruction from his teachers, any guidance on what to do, on best ways to take notes, he began using this app within the classroom that actually recorded the audio, but also recorded the notes that he was taking. I'm just going to share my screen real quick and show you part of this video. I apologize for there's no audio, but I just want you to kind of see what this student was doing, and I'll talk over the video. So in this video, the student took notes in a science class, and it recorded the teacher's lecture. But what's great for him is that he was able to visualize everything that he was thinking in the moment and everything that he was understanding. So while these notes might not be perfect, they were his understanding in the moment. And what was great about it is that these notes were something that he actually wanted to go back and re-listen to and to study and look over again and again. Whereas, I think about the notes that I take and notes that I took when I was in school. Oftentimes they were notes that I didn't frequent very often. I didn't go back to, but the student figured out a way that worked for him that helped him become a better learner all around. And what's really great about this, so not only did he learn to do this on his own, so it's an unintended consequence of having the technology there with him, but a lot of opportunities have come about this. So somehow, I'm not sure how it happened, an author that's well known for sketchnoting contacted him and his parents, and asked if he would be part of his next book as an example of how sketchnoting improves learning and retention. And the publisher actually reached out to the same family as well to work with them so the student can be part of this next book, which was fantastic and a huge opportunity for the student. And because of that and that continued interest in sketchnoting, he now has his own iTunes U course that you can find that actually teaches other students and teachers how to use sketchnoting in their learning to help with retention and understanding. And he's now working with the school district. He's a junior now. He's working with the school district in Bend to develop professional development for teachers on how to show this to their students as another way to record and show their learning. And because of that, it's moving towards an actual summer position with the school district, paid position that's going to allow him to, share his talents in other ways. So it's fantastic to see these unintended consequences, things that myself and my colleagues in Ben didn't plan for. I mean, there was no intention to have these types of opportunities, but they've developed just out of a student finding a need and finding a solution for it on their own through the technology. And the last kind of story I want to share is a personal story. When I was back in the classroom in Klamath Falls, and my last year I was there, I was a language development teacher, and I worked with K through 6 students that ranged from just immigrating to the States to having lived there their whole life. And so I had a lot of students that were proficient with their playground English, but struggled with academic language, and we had students that spoke hardly any English. But one thing that I noticed was that despite not having the understanding or the language itself, they didn't lack the thinking and the critical thinking, the problem solving. And so it was a challenge for me to put the learning into context and opportunity for them to continue to develop those thinking and problem-solving skills despite the language barriers. And so one thing we did was with my kindergartners, we had iPods, and anytime we would be doing a new language lesson, let's say we're focusing on prepositions on or above, on, and below, we would take the iPods and we actually walk around the school. I'd have about 12 kindergartners each day, and that's where I understood the meaning of herding cats, quite literally trying to get them through the hallways, but it was always a learning experience for them. And they would take pictures of these things, and I would just remind them, I would repeat sentences using above, on, and below, and they would just take pictures, and they would have these conversations, and they would be silly, and they would, sometimes would run to one end of the hall, and sometimes they'd be loud, but it was them engaging in their environment and learning. And we'd come back, and we'd all share these pictures. We had a place where we post them, and the kids would do it on their own, and we'd share these pictures, and then we begin to talk about those pictures, and actually they'd have to justify whether or not the picture actually fit with the words on, above, or below. And then they have to use sentences, and they have to describe the pictures. And it was a way for the kids to actually curate and create their own content. It wasn't me just saying, here's sentence structures, you need to memorize these, and this is what it looks like. But the kids were actually creating their own learning, and the conversations they had, and even the silliness and the play that happened was a meaningful part of that learning process. And Seymour Papert, in a lot of his papers, says that all children show a passion for interactive exploration in their immediate world. And I think it's important that we allow for that in all of our learning situations, whether we're teaching K-12, whether we're teaching, college or graduate studies and adult learning, that we allow for that interactive exploration of the world. And that's what's so great about the technology, that facilitates that so naturally, because it opens up so many doors and provides so much access to not only knowledge but also other people. And so another part that I did with my kids is I showed them the video of Cane's Arcade, and I think a lot of you are familiar with that, of a young man in Southern California that loved all the boxes that his dad had at his auto body shop, and he began to make these little arcade games and invited people in to come and play these games, and it blew up into this big thing. There's a documentary about it, but it really part of that kind of grassroots of the maker movement. And so I wanted to do this with my kids. So we did actually in my 4th through 6th grade classrooms, and they developed unique games. Some of them were less original than others, but we spent a lot of time just making these games and playing these games and understanding the physics and the rules behind the games they were developing. And then once we had the context, we began to talk about sequential events and giving directions. And then we rolled that language into it naturally, because they were already doing it. And now we were just looking at it from a more academic perspective, where I was giving them sentence forms and structures and grammar. And they were able to develop that and take, they had iPads at that time, and they were able to film their games, actually make instructional videos on how to play their game and describe the process. And they used the language in a context that was meaningful to them, because they created the context themselves. And so this meaningful learning came out of these opportunities, allowing kids to be kids, explore their immediate world, and find and create the context for their learning. But as we begin to look at deploying larger scale in my district now that I'm in Redmond School District, there's a lot of things that we have to look at. From my classroom's perspective, I thought I could do anything, and I could. In a lot of cases, if I tried my hardest, we were able to accomplish a lot. But now that I'm looking at it from a larger perspective, and I'm helping 11 schools deploy devices and provide instructional support to our teachers so they feel comfortable rethinking and reshaping their classroom and kind of relearning what learning looks like for students and for themselves. There's a lot of things that have to be taken into account of. And as was mentioned earlier, Elise and Kristen did a good job of mentioning this, that we can't overestimate or over talk about the need for professional development. And so as any school district begins to think about any type of technology integration or implementation, professional development should be up at the top of that list. Um, our job as educators is to provide the best learning opportunity for our students to find success, and not only in our schools but after they leave our schools. And to do that, we have to have teachers that are jazzed up about it. We have to have teachers that are excited. We have to have teachers that are genuinely interested in these kinds of things, and we have to provide that professional learning for them. Provide them resources they can go out and find more learning opportunities for themselves. But as was mentioned before, both Kristen and Elise went over kind of essentially all the things that I wanted to talk about, is that you have to have a plan. And for my district, we started with the Learning First. So we've had a community committee that's been working on creating drivers that describe why we're doing this one-to-one initiative. And we actually met 4 times, and over those 4 meetings, we just talked about learning and what we want learning to look like in our schools and how it's going to change and how do we need to relay that message to teachers and provide them support so they can make those changes in their classroom and see the need for this often different way of engaging students in learning. And so after we came up with our drivers, we then began to focus on the tool. What is the device that's going to best help us accomplish those drivers? What tool is going to help us best meet the goals we have for teachers and for students? And by putting learning first, it kept this really great focus on the need for continual improvement in our classrooms, both for students and for teachers. And now as we begin to develop our professional development plan, it's just kind of obvious now for everyone that was involved that this learning piece is our priority, and that the tool or the technology is just a means to get there. And as technology continues to change and these resources continue to evolve and grow and become obsolete in some cases, we need our teachers to be adaptable. And I think that by focusing on the professional learning aspect and providing teachers with regular, ongoing professional development, we create that culture within our school and hopefully within them that we have to be continually learning, that learning is lifelong and life-wide, and that we have to continue to provide those opportunities for our teachers, whether we're doing it in our district or we're providing opportunities for them to go outside of our district and learn from others. But just to kind of wrap up things I've been saying here, there's again, I want to come back to this need to be connected, and I think that's what the technology does as we look at who we are as learners and how we learn best from each other in groups, whether we realize it or not, that this search for the best tools, the best learning opportunities, for best practices, whatever it is, ultimately comes back down to how can we connect and learn from each other. And because it's us that collectively make up our communities, it's us that collectively make up our world. And so as we begin to embrace those opportunities that technology provides, not only within our own personal communities, but within our states and nations and world, that learning begins to grow and deepen. But yeah, I hope those stories make sense, and as you begin to look at these things, that the practical integration is really the key to student and teacher success. That if we look at the ways that teachers can actually go back and immediately begin to do these things and make those changes and make those connections, you'll find the most success.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. That really was very informative. And so now we're to our Q&A. Any thoughts, any questions from the field? It looks like we've got a good attendance here, particularly given that we're coming to the end of the school year when everybody's swamped. Please feel free to type in your questions. While people are typing, Jeremy, could you talk about some of the biggest challenges that you've faced in trying to do this outstanding work? What are some of the barriers, and what are some of the solutions for overcoming those barriers?
Certainly, I think the biggest barrier is mindset with teachers in the community. Students very rarely do we see a lot of pushback from students with regards to having a device or using the technology. To them, it's relevant. To them, it's part of their world, and it's part of everything they do. But there's still a lot of fear and misunderstanding, maybe some uncertainty and doubt with regards to the role of technology in the classroom. And for us, it's helping teachers become comfortable with that uncertainty, and helping them become comfortable with learning along the way. I think we, as educators, we like to know as much as we can beforehand. But I think it's very empowering to our students when they see us learning along with them. And so I think right now the biggest barrier is working with attitudes and mindset within our schools and our community that helps them understand the need and use of these devices and tools to amplify our learning potential. And a lot of that just comes, the solutions for that is just, regular communication. Something we plan doing for our one-to-one next year is having quarterly open houses for parents. We're going to have a parent help desk, kind of a phone line and help desk tickets they can submit. So if they're at home and have struggles, they can submit these tickets, and they'll get direct answers to them. They don't actually have to call the school. They'll be contacting the IT department directly. But we'll be having these opportunities for parents to meet and come and ask questions. We'll be doing some kind of professional development for parents as well as part of those meetings, where not only we'll be showing them, how to troubleshoot, connecting to Wi-Fi at home, things like that, but we'll be showing them some of the tools that kids are using, so that when the parents are at home, the kids have questions, or parents are participating in some of the home learning, that the parents can actually engage and interact with the tools that they're using. So whether they're using a learning management system or some sort of visual note-taking app or something like that, the parents can actually engage in that. And we'll provide as many opportunities to those parents to actually be part of the communities that we're creating online and digitally with our students.
That's great, really helpful. Some other questions from the field? Thoughts? Clearly, the work you've been doing, Jeremy, really raises the bar and underscores how important it is to engage students with technology, because they feel so empowered by it, and your example is so powerful. Any other thoughts that people want to share in terms of what they've learned? I think the other thing to note here is the technology that you've been talking about. It's not necessarily cutting-edge technology in terms of gaming or simulations or other kinds of technology tools that we see emerging all the time. It's really some very basic fundamental use of the technology that's available to teachers today. And it underscores the point that given all the challenges that teachers face and educators face, you don't necessarily need to be on the cutting edge to really make a difference.
Certainly. If you look at the adoption scale, when it comes to technology, your early adopters are always going to be thinking way ahead of everyone else, and they're going to be having those big ideas, and they're going to come up with the gaming and the programming and, the big, intercontinental projects where they're studying migration and weather and all these really cool things, and are collecting data. Those teachers are going to move ahead and do those things. But if you focus on the practical stuff, you're going to get more of your teachers to begin to participate and be involved. And then those teachers themselves become more comfortable with the tools and the resources and doing these things. And those teachers will be eventually kind of evolve into those early adopters, and they'll begin to do some of those bigger projects and some of those things, that you read online and you think, man, I wish I could do those things. But you have to start somewhere. It's like building Legos. You have to start with one brick at a time. And if you provide the bricks to the teachers and just let them build along the way, you'll be pretty amazed by some of the stuff that they're able to do with and without your instruction. So it takes patience. These types of rollouts, these types of implementations don't happen in a year. Our plan for Redmond School District is a 5-year rollout. We might have devices out in all the schools before the 5 years is up, but to actually see the significant change in learning, not only for our students but for our teachers, it's going to take time, and it's going to take patience, and it's going to take us working with everyone to the best of our abilities to meet the needs of our teachers so that they can best meet the needs of their students.
And Elise, do you want to add to that, building upon the experience that you've had working with schools through the Power Up What Works project? What's been your experience in terms of helping teachers integrate technology into their classrooms?
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting. As Kristen touched on a little bit, we worked with a wide variety of schools and districts from, a teeny tiny little charter school in a rural community where it was one class per grade to, larger urban districts that were multiple schools that we're looking at. And everybody was kind of at a different spot in the process of implementing technology and had different things that were their pain point, their sticking point, or their area that they were struggling with, and different ways that they had been successful. The school I worked with in particular was this rural charter school, and I tell their initial story a lot of why they had wanted to participate in a field test and help us develop these recommendations for other schools. And their director said, here's a perfect example of, they did a technology implementation project. They had gotten a grant to get some technology tools, and they had put interactive whiteboards into every classroom, and they had all these laptops. And she said, we had planned, and we planned out, and we budgeted, and we really thought about what we were doing and what we were going to use this grant money for. And it wasn't until they were all installed that they realized that nobody had thought to get these a ceiling mount for the projectors. And so every time a student or a teacher accidentally bumped into, they had them on like a rolling cart, the projector, everything had to be recalibrated. So all of the teachers had stopped using their interactive whiteboards as much as they wanted to use them because they were just so frustrated. And she said, so that's the very first thing, we realized right away that had been an oversight, in all our planning, and that's our very first thing that we're getting, is solving this simple problem. It's not that our teachers don't want to use the technology, it's that it's become a burden to use the technology because we did not, didn't factor that into our initial planning. And she said, that was one of the reasons why we were interested in participating in this project and doing more about how to help other schools improve their technology implementation planning, is because there's often that one little piece, or you didn't plan your PD out well enough, and you didn't ensure that teachers were getting that connection between not just how to use the tool, but how to really incorporate it into instruction in a way that is benefiting all students. And those are often the sticking points, or the places that schools or districts are stumbling. And it's not, an indictment or like, oh gosh, how could they not have thought of this? Because it's a very complicated process, and there's often, that one piece that got missed, or that one piece that maybe didn't get thought through enough that can kind of derail teachers' progress in being able to use the technology. So that was one piece that they were really focused on. And then they were really focused heavily on, okay, we've got these tools, but we want to make sure that teachers aren't just using them as a chalkboard. We want, if they've got devices for students and they've got interactive whiteboards and touch screens and things like that, how are we really incorporating that with evidence-based practices that are going to support our students with disabilities, or going to support our students who are ELL, or students who are struggling? And so that was another big piece, was really revamping all of their professional development offerings. And they started offering weekly trainings and get-togethers of the teachers, and because it was such a small school, they were able to do that fairly easily, but where they shared ideas, they collaborated, they talked about some things that had worked, things that hadn't worked, and what to try next. And so it was really a very iterative process, similar to what Jeremy was talking about, with the teachers kind of learning as they were going, and it being okay within the school, that they had set up that structure of it's okay to experiment, it's okay not to know all the answers, we're all kind of learning together and trying new things to see what works best for our students.
That's just a terrific example. And building off of that, Kristen, and your work with schools and helping them overcome their challenges, the reality that we all know that approximately 60% of students with disabilities spend over 80% of their time in general ed classrooms. Could you just talk about the implications of that for professional development, sustained teacher preparation and things that we need to be talking about and thinking about?
Well, I think this, this gets back to recommendation number 1 in the practice guide, which is the importance of working together as a team, and really pulling together the multiple initiatives that we have at a school, and pulling together the great thinking and the great collaborative expertise of all of the individuals within a school building, and really building off of one another instead of working in silos. And so as the general ed teacher is working within her classroom, she's also accessing the knowledge of the special education coordinator and the reading specialist, and working together with her instructional support team for RTI, and collaboratively together, they're exploring how they can expand into using technologies in new ways to ensure that students are getting multiple means of representation of the lesson, and that students are able to actually delve into representing their understanding and their learning of concepts in different ways. And it gets back to Jeremy's example, where he was talking about how excited students were getting about the learning as they were depicting their drawings, and able to show their connection with the learning in the classroom. And so I do think that it really is that piece of working together as a team, and we talked about it at a more school leader type way at the beginning of this webinar, in that you need to have your technology coordinator working together with your curriculum and instruction person to ensure that you're setting up professional development learning opportunities that are structured and that are supporting all of the classroom teachers. But even within the team meetings, and even within the informal ways that teachers are working together, if you have that mentality at the school level that we're all in it together, we're exploring different ways that we can bring initiatives together to be able to really meet the needs of students with disabilities, you're able to reach teachers and students in a new way with the power of technology.
That's really helpful. Jeremy, anything to add to that in terms of your experience?
No, I agree. One of the things that we're working on, the whole committee that we've been working on with regards to our, one-to-one rollout, it has been tied to our curriculum and learning department, and actually most of the, I guess, the literature that we've been sharing with families and staff in the district, it's called Learning and Technology. So again, we're trying to keep the focus on the learning, but also show that these two worlds need to coexist. And our ultimate goal actually in the district is to bring our departments closer together, even to the point where we're constantly working together, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's classroom instruction, so that there really isn't any distinction between the tool and the learning.
That's
Great,
absolutely. I'm sorry?
That was just me, Tracy. I was saying thank you to Jeremy.
Yeah.
And if there's no questions, we're about 5 minutes out, so we have a few small pieces to share. We do hope that if you haven't already, you'll register for and join our upcoming course. It launches officially tomorrow. That really gets into the work that's needed to make some of these things happen, to address some of the things that Jeremy's been talking about with how to move these initiatives forward in a school or district, how to focus on the learning, the professional development, providing the access to support that teachers and students need, and really working together as a team to make these things happen successfully. There's a ton of worksheets and resources, activities, and handouts as a part of that course. Feel free to share them, as you wish with any of your colleagues, or to help build this sense of, this is a shared mission and this is something that we're all working on together. We'll have an active course discussion forum. Kristen and I will be in there frequently sharing ideas and resources, but we hope to hear a lot from you all, things that have worked, things that haven't worked. I mean, we often learn more, as with the example I gave of the charter school. Sometimes we learn more about successful technology implementation from the mistakes we make. I know when I was a classroom teacher, I often learned more from the times I didn't do so well or something I tried didn't work out quite right, that allowed me to go back and reflect on that and think about how I could change things to be more successful next time, or how I could overcome a particular obstacle that I encountered. And visit CTD. We have a ton of resources on there about using technology to support students with disabilities, obviously, different ways of incorporating technology both into classroom teaching but also at the higher school and district level to really meet the needs of all our students. So, Kristen, do you have any final thoughts?
No,
Apart from we're really excited for this course, and we're excited to see you all online and hear your thoughts.
Well, I thank you all for the on behalf of the CTD team, and again, add my encouragement to go look at the course. It's really very well done and informative, and also encourage you to share it with your friends and colleagues so that they too can become part of the CTD community. We wish you well and hope to see you online again soon. Our thanks to Jeremy, Elise, and Kristen for the great workshop. Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.